Welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. So, the event and retreat space is booming. And whether it's a huge summit or a conference or a mastermind or a retreat, nothing resonates with people more than that human connection you can get at great events. However, you can make or break that emotional response with the type of experience you create. Ellaine Wellman is an event and retreat strategist and coach, and she's a subject matter expert in helping people create an experience for their event. And on this episode, we'll discuss how people and brands are pulling together these events, building the schedules of the shows, creating amazing experiences, contingency planning, and a lot more. So let's tune in to an event expert with an experiential shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Ellaine, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your background.
Hey, Kenneth, thanks so much for having me.
Of
I'm really
course.
excited. I am currently an event and retreat planner and coach. I started my career in public relations and moved from PR to event planning and did that working for somebody else for about 15 years, and now I do it under my own umbrella. And I was in public relations probably for it was over 10 years, maybe 14 years, something like that.
Was the shift to events, I mean, obviously it came with being part of the agency, but now that you've continued that on to your own business, was that something you fell into and found a passion for later, or was it something you always wanted to do?
I would say, well, I was doing events when I was working in public relations, including, this is kind of fascinating. One of our clients was the World Trade Center, and they had a 5 acre plaza that all the buildings, were around, that they didn't see as a venue. It was like a windy walkway of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
5 acres,
Yeah.
to get to and from the buildings. And the agency I worked for then, the PR agency, helped them realize that plaza could be a venue. And we started a summer concert series, free outdoor summer concert series. This goes way back.
Mm-hmm.
Now everybody in the world, at least in New York, where I am, has summer free outdoor summer concerts, but nobody was really doing that then, and we started that for them way back then. And so events were always a piece of PR for me. And then it was actually after 9/11. I was no longer at that company or working with the World Trade Center at that point, but after 9/11 is when I shifted, and it was kind of by chance that I got a job at a company that ended up focusing primarily on events. But PR is a burnout job. There might be PR people
Yeah.
out there listening. It's a burnout job, man. And it was also really fun with events that there was a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you actually saw something come to life, and then it
Sure.
was over, and then you got to move on. Whereas in PR, kind of could just go on forever, and you didn't have as much of that tangible, real living thing, you
Well,
know?
well, that was a tough time to shift to events after 9/11 because I remember those days, and there was not, travel was to any kind of event was one of the worst things in the world. I mean, people's attitudes changed, and there were a lot of conferences even back then, that really kind of got a lot quieter with security concerns and everything else. Even locally, it just became a lot more difficult to put on events.
Yeah, I actually quit my PR job right after
Yeah.
9/11, which was not the time. That shows you how burned
Yeah.
out I was. That was not the time anybody, especially in marketing, was quitting a job. Took a couple of months off and then landed at this other small PR agency. And initially it wasn't so event focused, but it quickly became event focused. And it was pretty interesting. The owner was actually French, and the majority of our clients were French companies that owned small, well, boutique style trade shows or large trade shows in France. And we launched those trade shows for them here in New York. And I did that for maybe, I don't know, 6 different trade shows,
Mm-hmm.
6 different companies, 6 different trade shows. And then, of course, we Several of those trade shows were held more than once a year because they were in the fashion industry. Um, and that was really fascinating, and I got to work with all the different audiences as the trade show producer, all the different audiences in the at trade shows, so, the attendees, the buyers, the exhibitors, and the media. And I drove most of the marketing in addition to the planning um, for those shows, which was a lot more fun to me than being in the booth with the client exhibitor back in my
Hmm.
PR days.
Well, I met you at a small conference gathering, and it was funny on the subway back to Times Square. I saw quite a few people dressed for Dinner on Blanc. There were 5,000 people out at Battery Park
Mm.
for the ninth
Yes.
annual event where everybody dressed up, and of course the rain knocked a lot of them out, and everybody was dressed in white, wearing ponchos, trying to plastic ponchos. So I'm sure there was an entrepreneur on site ready to sell ponchos. But as I was sitting at the same marketing conference with you, the meetup with our mutual friend, it just really made me laugh because we were sitting through an event where the air conditioning in the building literally had been turned off and nobody was there to turn it back on after hours for a 7 o'clock or what was it, 6:30, 7 p.m. type event. And as I'm sitting there and I'm talking to you beforehand, I'm thinking, wait, this is a great conversation for a show. And we also talked about how there are well over, because I did some documentation on it, there are well over 400 different marketing conferences going on throughout the U.S. on any given year now, and those are ones that typically have 100 or more. So it's really become a really
Hmm.
crowded space. And what have you sort of seen in the event and conference and meetup and retreat type space with where events are going?
Yeah, and by the way, it was super hot that
Oh
day
yeah,
too.
yeah.
We were melting.
Nothing like the upper 90s without air conditioning.
um, and I will just say before I answer your question that with events, I learned over the years that I have never seen it all. If you get to the point where you think you've seen it all in events, you
Exactly.
haven't.
Most event planners don't have on their tips sheet, make sure the air conditioning or heat is
Right.
working.
Some things you don't think you need to
Yeah,
address, right? But you
exactly.
do. I mean, a couple of months ago, you may remember a helicopter crashed
Yep.
on top of a building in Midtown, and I had an event planned in that building
Oh
that
my
night.
gosh.
So that's not a thing that you say very often, right? So everything can happen with events. But let me get to your question. This goes back quite a ways, but I found a statistic that since 1987, the Harris Group says that live event and experience spending has increased about 70%. That's just a huge number. It goes back a long way, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
huge number. And it used to be that companies might allocate like 10% of the marketing budget, but that is going upwards of 20% a lot of times these days with big companies like Facebook, WeWork, Salesforce. And I think some of that could even be attributed back to Steve Jobs, who just, brilliantly masterminded the big product reveal as an event, right? Which we kind of don't even think of that as being so revolutionary now.
Mm-hmm.
But you know that turned Apple and their big reveal events just got tons and tons of exposure and experience and excitement. And younger people really want experiences, and that's what they're going for, and that's one of the drivers as well. And just there's nothing to replace face to face, belly to belly connection, even in our digital world. And an article last year in Entrepreneur magazine, the title of the article kind of says it all. The title is Why Live Events Are Rocket Fuel for Business Growth. And they talked to a lot of top CMOs, and they just said, there's no digital tactics or tricks that can replace face to face marketing, and that live events may just be the single best channel to fuel business growth.
Well, how are they using them then? I mean, I've put on events before. A lot of times they are a product reveal, like you talked about, or maybe it's a concert or something. I speak at a lot of conferences, as well. But I'm always curious how what you're seeing in the marketplace for how companies are using these to really drive growth. I mean, is it a lead generation play? Is it just to get their name out there? What are you starting to see?
I think it's all of that and more. And, obviously you can have different goals and different metrics for your events, but it's certainly a way to make a name for yourself in the marketplace. If you're more on the earlier stage, on the building stage, it's a way to connect with your current customers and create, raving fans. If you create an incredible experience for them, and to get them to talk about you, which we know, you know, these, with especially with the younger people too, they're not going for the old, I'm the company, I'm going to tell you through my advertising who I am. They trust what their peers are saying about your company and about your brand, and you can definitely use events that way as well. So I mean, you just have to get clear on what your goal is and your purpose initially, and design everything about your event to support that purpose.
Yeah, I agree, and I attend a lot of conferences, marketing and advertising. I've done a lot of entrepreneur stuff as well, but some of my favorite events are the ones put on by the companies themselves. Just like you were talking about with Apple's big reveal, Adobe has a massive summit, IBM has a massive summit.
Hmm.
A lot of them do, and they have some of the top speakers in the world come to these events, and they are experiences as much or more than anything. But to your point about not wanting to hear brand babble, if you will, from a brand, they give you a really great opportunity if you bring in the right kind of thought leader speakers, not company spokespeople only to do, to sell the same brand babble up on a stage. But if you create that experience, it's the same thing that draws so many people to marketing events and conferences and all these kind of things, just like where we met, because what people are going to talk about is not what's on your product brochure. It's about the experience and the things they learned and who they met. And I've really seen some of the company events, when they're large enough, just really blow out a lot of the other conferences, completely out of the water.
Yeah, and some of those companies, they do have the budget. I mean, it does cost a
Yeah.
significant amount of money to put on big events like that. And if they are repeating them and doing them again, that alone shows you they're getting the ROI, because they're not going to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars on something that's not giving them the ROI. But you definitely hit it on the head, Kenneth. We don't want, the president up there talking for 40 minutes
The head of
about
sales.
whatever, or the head of
Oh,
sales, or, I mean, and so it goes back to really putting the time in to create the strategy around the purpose, and looking for creative ways that are going to be fun and compelling to get that purpose served. And I'll recommend the book I recommended to you the night that we
yeah.
met, really dives into this. A woman named Priya Parker wrote a book called The Art of Gathering, and she's a facilitator, and she's worked with Obama in the White House and the G8, and she's giving you just a complete fabulous information about how to make your events stand out. And it all starts with tapping into that purpose and going deep into the why of the event. And initially, the why of the event is going to be like, to sell my stuff, to, some, really top line purpose. But you keep digging in, to why, and why you want to keep create community. And her book's just amazing. I recommend it for anybody that's looking into or considering doing events and live gatherings.
Well, we know that the spend has gone up, but have you seen the number of events go up?
Yes, I think that there are. I mean, I think that goes back to the fact that there's just so much noise.
Yeah.
There's so much noise in the digital space. So it's like we're reverting back to the old school ways
Yeah.
to some degree. Like how do you stand out and how do you get your consumers' attention? And if they're looking at you face to face, then, or they're in the audience and you're created some incredibly memorable experience for them, that is just so much more meaty than email marketing and digital stuff, which of course you still need, but it just does not compare. And so people are really tapping into the power of live events and creating some amazing experiences.
Well, they've always been around. I guess I'm just noticing more. There are a lot more agency events as well. Agencies have really jumped into this space a lot deeper than they did. It didn't have to be just the largest agencies putting on a big show. You see a lot of boutique firms putting on small events that are just as good as some of the large events, just a little smaller in scale. And I've just really seen a large number of those put on because, again, they need to create some sort of differentiator for what it is they do, or just put them in a lighter mood, give some people some alcohol and hors d'oeuvres, and have much better conversations. But I've also seen a lot of the things grow now with masterminds that people are pulling together, these more of the smaller retreats, if you will,
Hmm.
and that's one of the ones I'm kind of curious, is that starting to see a large amount of growth as well?
It is a lot. I mean, well, I am in the coaching space as well,
Sure.
and so that's obviously much smaller financial category than
Right.
these giant companies that we're talking about. But they're often those companies are run by solopreneurs or
Exactly.
with virtual freelance teams, and again, it's really about relationship building. And for especially in the coaching space with these mastermind groups and the retreats, those live experiences are often where the leader can do their deepest work. Maybe they're doing spiritual personal development work, and being in person at a retreat over several days together is where you can go the deepest with your work and help your people the most. And it might be, a business building retreat. And again, though, you're together for an extended period of time out of your normal environment, and you're able to do your deep work around business development then as well with your clients. And it all goes back to just relationship building and building deeper connection.
So, what should a company expect? What kind of goals should they expect from putting on an event? I mean, we know there's a rush for a lot of these groups to put them on because they want to get their name out there. But are you helping them with, figuring out what their KPIs are?
Sure. And I mean, my eyes kind of went up when you asked that because I'm thinking about somebody that's never done it before. And, it just like in my PR days, expectations can be unrealistic sometimes, and
Yeah.
we have an official term in the industry called getting the butts in seats is a big part of the effort is the promotion and the marketing to
Mm-hmm.
get people to the event. Um, but, it's having an overall strategy is clearly the best approach, and to really think about what it is you're trying to achieve, and then to determine what those markers are,
Mm-hmm.
and that all then feeds into how you design the event. And a lot of times people might start with the idea for the event. That's the fun part, that's the creative part, and you can back into it, but you have to make sure that it matches up, you know
Well, so if I'm not IBM or Adobe or Salesforce, with their Dreamforce or one of these massive, massive shows, if I'm a company, mid-sized company, how do I need to start, or at least what do I need to start thinking about in order to put together an event? You know, before they come to you, what do they need to start thinking about as far as their planning goes?
Well, they typically, do start with a concept. I mean, I could start with like, I want to do a conference. I don't know what it's about. Like,
Yeah.
we could start there, but they probably
Well,
have
what are
some.
people coming to you? At what point are people coming to you and saying we need help?
Yeah, that really varies. Sometimes companies come to me and they have a good idea of what they want to create, and they need somebody to do the logistics side. Even, they might have the venue, they might not have the venue. So I could be diving into the venue research and negotiating the contract with the venue and any of the vendors like AV, photography, videography, even working with them on developing the signage and the branding for the event. They may or may not need that. The smaller groups might need help with that, or the coach
Mm-hmm.
groups. So it can deal with all the logistic pieces. And sometimes they come in with a vague concept, and we start from there. And yeah, so people come, from at all stages of the process to
Mm-hmm.
me. So everything I do, outside of like my coaching group is really, I have to do custom proposals because
Sure.
everybody comes in different places, and it's is it a 5-person dinner or a 5,000-person conference?
Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see event planners and companies make when they're, starting to put these events together? And obviously, air conditioning is, is one of them, but that was not the fault of our conference organizer. But what are the things you see that people commonly make mistakes? What are the pitfalls they need to avoid?
Yeah, one is starting too late.
Yeah.
There there are a lot of details that go into managing an event project. And so often people think they can pull something together super quickly. Maybe they can. It depends on what they're trying to pull together and how much time they have to devote to it. If you're 100% on your event, maybe you can do it in a few months, but you also have to factor in that butts and seats phase,
Mm-hmm.
and especially if you're asking people to travel to your event, people have to rearrange, their schedule, their life to get to your event. So make sure that you start early enough. I mean, 6 to 12 months is great. You can definitely do an event in less time than that, but 6 to 12 months is a good general, way to look at it. And a lot of times, larger companies or medium sized companies may think that they can handle the event planning with their in house marketing team or
Yeah.
their assistant or their administrative assistant.
Happens all the
And
time.
that's usually a recipe for disaster. I mean, they don't have the expertise. You'll probably end up losing money because they don't even know that they can negotiate or that they can negotiate for this or that, and it's a lot of work, as I mentioned. So they end up either not getting to their real work, or things fall through the cracks with the event, um, and then making sure that your team when is on board and up to speed on what they should be doing at the actual event. I mean, if you are doing something focused on sales, or that's a piece of it, make sure that the sales team and the marketing team that hasn't been involved in the day to day knows what they should be doing and what they should be focusing on at the event.
Yeah. To your point about planning it 6 to 12 months ahead, I think a lot of people, maybe in New York, it's a little bit different where have got the volume of people to support it, but you've got to look at see at what other conferences are out there because, in a lot of cities, even if it has 1 million people, it's going to be really hard to support, multiple conferences at the same time. I just got back from speaking. Well, I was speaking at one in Chicago recently, and there were 4 conferences within a probably half square mile of where we were, and one of them was, I think it was another Salesforce event that had several thousand people, and there are only so many people in the same field, for example, that are going to go to your event. And if you've bumped it up against somebody that's bigger and more planned out and is, capturing more attention, it can really be difficult to draw people in. I know there was one that they wanted, one group wanted me to speak at, and I believe it was in Salt Lake City. And I looked on at other events out that were also in Salt Lake City, and Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama, or some big names were at another event. I'm like, hell, I want to go to see Oprah Winfrey
Yeah.
speak. I don't want to hear myself speak. I mean, so it's. I think it's really important for people to plan also to sort of position themselves. You can only do so much of that, but it just makes sense to see what else is out there in the event space, because that can affect your costs. It can affect the amount of attention, but when you are working with these groups, this is something that comes up with a lot of conferences. What do you do to help them look for speakers? How does that come up? Because I'm sure that's probably, I mean, very. There's not an event out there that doesn't have some sort of speaker, and hopefully it's not, as we talked about the VP of sales, but they have either somebody who's an industry leader, a motivational speaker, something like that. But where do speakers come into play with these events with you?
Yeah, great points. And I just want to circle back first to your
Yeah,
point about the calendar. That is super important to see what is happening in the market. It might be a competitive event, like you mentioned. It might be some other type of event, like you mentioned, the Oprah Winfrey thing.
yeah,
And also look at holidays because,
absolutely.
obviously we know when
Oh yeah,
Christmas is and Thanksgiving and 4th of July, but when's Mother's Day? When's Father's Day? When's, depending on your community, New York, we have to look at, if we're doing things in New York, a lot of times we have to look at the Jewish holidays, which
yeah,
are big chunks of time, like a week or something where we might want to avoid. So holidays are really important to look at as well.
yeah. Then everybody jams it into fall and spring only.
Right. That's what tends to happen.
Yeah,
Yeah. You can piggyback on some of those larger events.
sure.
That can work.
Yeah, that's
Like if
true.
there's a big conference in Chicago that everybody's already going to be there, you could take a couple of days before, a couple of days after, and piggyback on having those people in the community already gathered, already
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, but yes, speakers. I did a lot of the speaker um, booking, back when I was doing all those trade shows. And I think it's great to look a little outside the box for some of the speakers. You don't, if it's a marketing conference, you don't need everybody specifically marketing gurus, get outside the box with the thinking. One thing that worked really well for me in those trade show days is I would get one leader, one thought leader, influencer type person to put together a panel, and then they would take on getting the speakers on their panel.
Sure.
And they had the connections, and it could have even been a trade magazine editor, or a designer of some type or that kind of thing. And then they would take on pulling in top notch speakers to be on their panels, and that worked really well. Um, and to make sure that you vary the topics, if you're running several different speakers, if it's a speaker conference, vary the topics. And it's also important to look at the time slots you're putting them into. I always found, that last time slot of the conference was a really challenging time. And you have to, because people are leaving, starting to think about packing up or whatever. So you have to think about, what's going to serve you best there. Should you put your top guy there so people stick around? Should you know that that's going to be a less attended, potentially a less attended session? So you want to put somebody that you're giving a break to in that spot, so those are the types of things to consider too with the scheduling. And on the scheduling note, make sure you build in enough breaks. Okay, this goes back to one of the mistakes as well. People don't necessarily want to just be slammed 24/7 during your event with content and information. Part of the experience is giving them that time to connect with other people, that they can do that during breaks, and to give their brain a rest too. You know how you go to some of these and then
Mm-hmm.
your brain, you just like fog over, you can't take anything else in because you're just getting too much information forced on you. So that's something to consider as well.
So coaching obviously is really popular today, and you also offer a lot of thought leadership in the space with coaching people to do events. Elaborate a little bit on what you're doing in that space.
Yeah, so I basically work with clients two different ways. I have the done for you, you're hiring your event planner or retreat planner services. And then on the other side, I work with solopreneurs. They're not all coaches, they're coaches, healers, creatives, online marketers, solopreneurs mostly. Um, that maybe they're not yet at the level to be able to hire a done for you service, but they're ready and they're excited about starting with events and retreats. And I walk them through exactly how to do it themselves with my guidance in a group program that I run. It's basically like an incubator. It's called Live Event Mastery. And I'm in there with them. I kind of feel like I'm getting my hands dirty with them, on their events and retreats to make sure that they know everything that they need to know, and that's something, with events, there's so many things you don't know what you don't know, right? And there's a lot of that in the event space.
Agreed. So Ellaine, you are on a shark's perspective. You live in New York with a lot of different kinds of sharks, but I got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Well, I love Shark Tank. You might get that answer a lot, I don't know, but I totally love Shark Tank. So that's one part of it, but I also want to tell you a really quick story. My dad, when he was drafted towards the end of World War II, he didn't see any action, but I think he was on like an aircraft carrier, and one day he caught a hammerhead shark by accident. Not He wasn't doing it
Well,
on
yeah,
purpose. I
yeah.
don't know what he was fishing for, but it wasn't that. And I don't know a lot of details about that story, but that definitely stuck with me. So
Hey, sharks played a big part in World War II. If you look back at the USS Indianapolis, so story with different kind of sharks, but still. So, Ellaine, are you ready for the 5 most important and interesting questions that you're going to be asked today?
absolutely, I can't wait.
All right, number one, conferences or retreats?
Oh man. Um, as an attendee, I would answer retreats. As a planner, I would answer conferences.
Interesting. All right. Number two, goes back to your Louisville roots. So, Kentucky Fried Chicken or Popeyes?
Oh, KFC, no
All
doubt.
right. Number three, event planning or coaching event planners?
Hmm. I would say coaching because that's the area that I can scale.
Okay. Number four, Buddha, the religious figure celebrated throughout a lot of the Far East, or your kitten Buddha?
Oh, I was gonna say, my
Yeah.
cat's named Buddha.
Yeah. There was a reason for that question. So,
You did some research
yeah, I
there, or else
try.
I mentioned that. I don't know what. Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say my cat,
Yeah.
but there's a reason he's named Buddha. So
Yeah. Well, number five, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
cornbread.
Okay. Tell us a
I
little bit
thought
of.
you were gonna ask me biscuits or bagels.
No, biscuits or cornbread. It's it's another story. But Ellaine, where can people find out more about you? Find out more about your event planning business and experience and thought leadership in the space.
It's at my website, EllaineWellman.com.
Excellent. All right, Ellaine, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you. It was really fun.
So there was my conversation with Ellaine Wellman, an event and retreat strategist and coach, and she's a subject matter expert in helping people create an experience for their event. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from a conversation with her. First, I've put on a few shows in my time as well, and you've got to plan early and give yourself plenty of time. Attendees have options, and the event space is crowded, so plan early to help them plan for your event. But like most of life with events, regardless of how many you've put on, know this, you can never plan for everything. Ellaine does it for a living and knows fully well what to expect, better than most of us, but anything can happen. Speakers don't show, the microphones don't work, Wi-Fi issues, the air conditioning gets turned off on a 90-degree day. There was one large concert that I put on, and because of the heat, I had to go buy a half dozen of those large portable air conditioning units just in anticipation of problems with a much larger commercial AC unit. So you can never plan for every contingency, but you should always think through as many air quote disaster scenarios as possible, and then plan for what you can fix if this happens and what you cannot fix too. Remember, the people are still sitting there and they need you to get on with the show. Second, it's all about experience now with events. I cannot remember how many conferences and summits and shows that I've attended in my career, but it's not all about the venue. It's not all about the culture of the crowd or the speakers or the music or the after parties. It's not all about the content, so don't overcram the entire show around too heavy of a content load without giving people, as Ellaine said, the opportunity to breathe. It's all of those things and so many more that make an event an experiential moment. Think about how well-run luxury hotels run their business. From A to Z, they think about the experience. So plan yours accordingly. Think about the attendees and how they will network and make connections, how they will take in the lights and the music and the content, what they will remember, even about your product or service, and your purpose long after you leave. You don't have to spend a gazillion dollars to do this, but experience should create an emotional response. Third, when you create or are managing an event, I loved Elaine's reminder that you need to design everything about your event to support your goals and purpose. Does that mean for a product reveal or a book launch or something else, you should just pull together some people for an event, serve your own watered down champagne with some hors d'oeuvres, and then have your head of sales or the author or whomever deliver a keynote address that you think will move anyone? No way. First, dig deep into why people travel to your event. Whether at an office or at a courtyard near a beach, people took the time to join your meeting. Figure out what that purpose is and tap into that emotional element of what you want people talking about beforehand and after. That purpose should flow through the champagne. Just leave it off the hors d'oeuvres. And as always, think about the audience and not the sales pitch. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Go host an amazing event. Don't forget the AC. And most importantly, always plan for sharks. So please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.